Okay, so let's get started. Very happy to be here today with these three really smart people. And what we're going to talk about is freedom of information laws. We've all heard about them, whether they're called Freedom of Information Act, Right to Information Act. Many governments, particularly in the last 10 years, have made efforts to create laws that make it easier for citizens, journalists, political activists to access public data, often through the internet, that they can use to better understand government activities and, in theory, to better be able to hold governments accountable for their promises to their people. At Global Voices, and particularly at Global Voices Advocacy, which is the project that I lead, we talk a lot about activism and democratic values and promoting change through fact-based reporting and information, but we can't do any of that without the information. I was actually talking about this the other day with Juan Tadeo, and we were talking about different policy issues that we wanted to focus on and campaigns we wanted to run, and he sort of circled back around to the point, but without transparency, we can't do anything. So it's exciting to me to have these three esteemed panelists here because they each represent different types of institutions and people who are working really hard to make these kinds of laws actually work better for citizens. First, we have Marietta Ley. Marietta is a journalist and researcher at Atlatszo.hu, which is a Budapest, Hungary-based transparency organization. Atlatszo.hu won the Breaking Borders Award at the Global Voices Summit in 2012. Marietta has been an author and translator with Global Voices since 2009. And since 2012, she has been running, the pronunciation, Juan.hu, a website that helps citizens send complaints from their neighborhood to local municipalities in Hungary. Juan Tadeo, sitting next to her, is an independent blogger based in Mexico City, where he writes about justice, politics, and transparency. He has been writing for Global Voices since 2011, and he's a lawyer. He's worked for multiple law firms in Mexico in labor and criminal litigation work, but he currently works with the Federal Institution for Access to Public Information, which is the entity that manages this policy for Mexico. And then finally we have Malou Mangahas, who is the executive director of the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, which is one of the co-sponsors of our event. And Malou is a veteran of Philippine journalism. She was a Nieman Fellow at Harvard University. She has worked for multiple print and broadcast news media organizations, both here in the Philippines and abroad. And that, without further ado, I would like to ask Juan Tadeo to come up and introduce us to freedom of information policy.
Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. Yeah, do you have the clicker? Oh, yeah. Hello. Well, I'll be talking briefly about transparency in Mexico and how it works, and how it's supposed to work in most of the places, so I think it will be helpful. Oh, well, I'm hoping it will be helpful. First, I'd like to say that opinions are my own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of my employers or any other agencies of the government. I'll also say that all the information I'm about to share with you today is public and it's available online. If you want any detail about it, please find me. So, what's this? We're going to talk about some of the good points of the transparency laws in Mexico. This law is enforced by an institution called FOI for short. It is an autonomous body that guarantees the fundamental right to access to information. The first good thing is that any person may file a request. You could do it from this room. You don't need to be a Mexican. You are not required to provide proof that you're living in Mexico or anywhere else. The access to information is free. This is really important because in some countries you are required to pay some fees, but not in Mexico. The only thing you need to pay for is for the reproduction of the information. Sometimes this could be done in a CD or something really cheap. You could pay no more than $1 for all the information you need. Some of the things that are public in Mexico, according to this law, are the wages of public servants, the services they render, information about budget, public contracts, and that sort of thing. That is something you can access to without difficulties. The FOI, the organization I was telling you about, issues definitive resolutions that can be appealed by government agencies. They cannot do that, but the citizens can appeal these resolutions to the judicial power. These are some numbers that are really interesting. We have how many requests for information have been filed. In 1 year, almost 150,000 requests. We're working on the figures for the last year, so they are not available right now. The Institute has issued in 2013 almost, 7,000 resolutions about transparency and privacy of personal data in the hands of government agencies. You can see that most of these resolutions do not revoke the acts contested by petitioners. Just over 1,000 of the resolutions revoke the answers the government agencies provided. Well, we're going to talk about the bad things about the law. Most requests are made through electronic mediums, like the internet, of course. But only 3 out of 10 homes in Mexico have internet access, so that's a problem. We have to find out how to get transparency to people who has no internet access. That is something we should tackle right away. If we consider that each request is filed by a different person, that would mean that less than 1.4% of the population inquire for public information. That is a really slow figure. We need to bring transparency, as I said, to more people, and people need to make use of these mechanisms. 45% of the requests for information are filed by individuals who claim to live in Mexico City. That is the capital city. I say they claim to live in Mexico City because they are not required to prove that they live anywhere else. But we have some states in Mexico with really low participation. Some of them as below as like 4% of the requests. This is one figure we should take a look at. Roughly 45% of the cases ruled by FOI, after the FOI has issued a resolution, the government agencies claim that information is non-existent and there's nothing we can do about that. Once they say formally that we don't have that document, there's nothing we can do, and that is a problem. So now that we have talked about the good and the bad, we're going to talk about the ugly truth for transparency in Mexico. The institution has been taken over by political parties. Recently, on April 2014, the Senate appointed new commissioners in FI. There are 7 of them. All of them are tied to the predominant parties in Mexico, and one of them is really tied to the president. I mean, they are close friends, and that's, again, that's public information. You can check it out. Proceedings are sometimes lengthy. Sometimes it could take over 8 months between the filing of the request and the ruling by FI. Not all public agencies carry out the resolutions. Some have chosen not to do it. Information about tax exemptions, rewards granted for security agencies. By the way, rewards are really important because as most of you know, we have a drug war going on in Mexico, so they put signs like in the Wild West saying reward for this guy. Those rewards are never transparent. So when it comes to rewards, the information has been hidden by government agencies with no consequences. No consequences, sorry. And the other bad thing, the other ugly truth is that FI lacks the power to punish this administrative misconduct. If somebody refuses to give the information, there's nothing the institution can do about that. So we have transparency in the law, and we have an institution who makes sure that transparency exists, but we don't have accountability, and that is really a problem. And I think that's it. I'll pass the microphone to Marietta because I think she has more interesting things to say. Thank you for listening.
And that one as well. Okay. Do they have my slide? Oh, great. Hi, my name is Marietta. I work for Atlatszo. You can see the name over there. Atlatszo means transparent in Hungarian. It's an investigative journalism website which was started in 2011. And we use heavily the freedom of information law in Hungary because we believe that it's a great tool for investigative journalists to cover corruption stories. We have launched a website that helps filing of freedom of information requests to citizens. You go on the website, you search for the public body, and you put there what kind of document you are requesting from a public body. We have more than 3,000, actually it's almost 4,000 requests filed through our website, which was launched in 2012. The name of the website is Kimitud, which means who knows what. And it's running under an open source engine, meaning that anybody who is sitting here and they don't have a website like this in their country, then they can just download the software and install it there. And how do we use the freedom of information law in Hungary? I'm going to showcase you 3 cases when our journalists have been using the law. This one is about the opening of a new stadium in Budapest, the capital of Hungary. During the opening ceremony, 3 fighter jets were flying over the stadium to celebrate the opening. Now, one thing you have to know is that in Hungary, the subsidies for football or soccer have been increased in the past years because our Prime Minister loves football. So we have invested in building new stadiums, and he has built one in his native village as well. This one is a stadium in the capital, so about the fighter jets. This was a story when everyone was reading in the media that, wow, fighter jets over the stadium, how come? So our journalists filed a freedom of information request asking the Defense Ministry about the budget of this performance and the official request to fly the jets over the stadium. The Defense Ministry in the end acknowledged that there was no official documentation about the request, and actually the president of the soccer club, the first guy is the minister, the second guy is the president of the soccer club, he just requested orally to fly the fighter jets over there. And the Defense Ministry argued that this cost no extra money to taxpayers because it was part of a regular drill. So, of course, taxpayers wanted to have fun too, and they requested from the ministry to fly. There was one guy who was requesting the ministry to fly the jets over the house of his girlfriend who had a birthday. And the ministry couldn't say no because, you know, like it turns out you can just request jets in Hungary. So what they said that actually they cannot fly over there because the regular drill is not over that area. So they are sorry. Another case, oh, I'm missing one here. Yeah, okay. Another case was when we filed a joint request together with 6 other NGOs and media outlets, because in 2013 the Hungarian government introduced a monopoly over the sale of tobacco. This means that now in Hungary only those shops can sell tobacco, and they are called national tobacco shops, which have a license from a state authority. We wanted to know how the licenses were distributed, what was the procedure of the selection, and who were the ones who were not selected to have a tobacco shop. The government reacted by amending the Freedom of Information Act. In less than 4 days, they passed an amendment saying that you cannot file vexatious Freedom of Information requests. Vexatious is, of course, not a legal term, so we don't know yet how this will affect the freedom to access the documents. There are court cases going on where we are trying to fight this amendment of the law. And what we do to increase awareness of citizens in using the Freedom of Information Act, this is our lawyer who is at the moment talking to NGO workers, citizens just like you, sitting like this, about the law. So we run one-day workshops where a lawyer tells about the law, an investigative journalist tells people how to draft a blog post or an article from a request that was fulfilled, meaning that they have obtained the documents, or if it was denied, what to do, how to publish it. And then in the end, we teach people how to use the website, and we file Freedom of Information requests on the spot. And thank you. Read our articles on English.Atlatszo.hu.
Very interesting presentations. We don't have a Freedom of Information law yet, so the Philippine presentation would be a bit different. Okay, I'm sorry. So in the Philippine context, well, I wish we could have requested, you know, the contracts for the street children who were brought to our resort when the Pope came over, but we still do not have a law. So in the Philippine context, we are thinking freedom of information, freedom of expression, and media freedom, internet freedom are integrally connected, the way it's been done in the advocacy work and the way it's playing out in our context. So we say that the rights offline should also be rights online, according to the United Nations and all other countries professing to promote democracy. So we say this because we think also that threats online are also threats offline and vice versa. So for disclosure, I have to say that the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism has been a founding member of the Right to Know Right Now coalition of 160 CSOs working for a Freedom of Information law's passage since 15 years ago. So FOI, FOE, and press freedom are from our perspective, integral and indivisible rights, not of journalists, but of the citizens. Print, TV, radio, online, and social media should therefore be the community of communicators on this issue. There should be also an agreement that all hands should be on deck to obtain not just the FOI law, but also transparency, accountability, and good governance. We say this because the right to know, as journalists we've seen it, is the bedrock and enabler of many other rights that have been denied our citizens, like right to education. We don't know contracts or orders implementing the K+12 or the new book publication contracts. We have to also look at right to health, livelihood, land, property. Many of the human rights victims, their families had requested for documents about which police or army unit had arrested their loved ones, but we still do not have any real proof that this request had been acted upon. We need to also have actually security and property and many other rights protected by an FOI law. We've seen farmers, for example, who are supposed to be beneficiaries of agrarian reform programs. They've lost their claim to the land because land titles had not been issued to them on time. Government's disclosure of some information, in our view, in the Right to Know Coalition is not good enough. So transparency has been claimed by the Aquino government that has actually sustained the effort to post public documents, budget documents online, but it seems to suggest that this is already a substitute for FOI. We worry, for example, that sometimes government's voluntary disclosure of documents online has been proposed as a bypass mode for actually granting the people's right to know. First and last, we think FOI is the citizens' right to access documents, information in the custody of government and public agencies that are vested with public interest. In the Philippine Constitution and law, that means involving use of public funds. So, I mean, those are the premises are quite clear. So, we think, actually, it should be important to look at the Philippines and how it measures up to access to information benchmarks, global indices, as well as guarantees in law. This is how we are seeing the context. The Philippine press is one of the liveliest in Asia, but we actually live in both freedom and fear. We are one of the deadliest places in the world for journalists. Since the People Power Revolt of 1986, 153 journalists have been killed, mostly in the provinces, and a good number of them wrote their last stories about local crime and corruption. Very important to appreciate this because the context of asserting FOI actually derives from an understanding that even if you think media is free and there's no state control, there is actually a creeping control by politicians, not necessarily the state, over media in the Philippines, as well as also impunity from mostly non-state state actors. So the killings and the harassment of journalists and citizen media continue because we have this culture of they will not be punished. The impunity with which they kill and harass journalists continues because our police do bad investigation work, our courts are too slow, we have no witness protection program that's strong, doesn't even have adequate money, and many of these state actors are in political alliances with the political parties in power. So the policy is clear in the Constitution, but in practice, actually, more and additional laws have been passed recently, Data Privacy Act and Cybercrime Prevention Act, that tend to restrict rather than expand the ambit of freedom. Okay, so these are the formal guarantees in theory and law, the Philippine Constitution, Bill of Rights, as well as an article stating that the right of the people to information on matters of public concern must be recognized. In practice, however, this is what's happening. The new laws that have been passed, and we have a saying in the Philippines, if you want it, you will find ways to do it. If you don't like it, you will find excuses to avoid it. And this is what we're thinking is the status right now. In the meantime, this is the active, dynamic front. CSOs, media, citizen media, and all other sectors in the Philippines agreeing to campaign for FOI legislation on all fronts. Of course, the first is legislative lobbying. 15 years already and no FOI yet. We had filed in the 16th Congress last year a People's Indirect Initiative, meaning the CSOs themselves crafted the law based on the lessons of previous Congresses. We've done a public awareness campaign. 160 civil society organizations are there, and we have an FOI Youth Initiative network of 237 student councils and youth organizations. We do civic engagement. I think Cebu has been one of the ramparts of the campaign of on FOI for the forums that had been held here over the years. 80,000 signatures had been obtained online and offline for President Aquino to pass and encourage Congress to pass and endorse the FOI bill. We've done town hall meetings, fun runs. We run, although we are not of age to do much running anymore. We do public service advocacy ads by journalists, citizen journalists, memes, social media campaigns. We've done everything practically almost to have this law passed. The community of practice is the new thing that we're doing. PCIJ and the Right to Know Coalition have started training CSOs so that they could file requests for documents simultaneously. We're trying to build body of evidence so that eventually maybe we can file suit against the agencies that are denying us, even in the absence of the law. So these are actually data on where the Philippines lies. You will see press freedom in the Philippines is ranked number 149 in terms of 180 countries in the world. So the openness that you see in the conversations we do publicly and privately actually belie the true state of press freedom in the Philippines. We've done a lot of coping mechanisms, but we think that FOI practice is the new front. We might be able to actually assert our right and claim it even without the law. And finally, I think this is very important. There's so many game changers now that technology could assist or enable. In the journalism front, we're talking about all of these things. Media platforms that allow for campaigns, advocacy, through blogging, social media, data journalism, data-driven journalism, etc. And then governments of the world have also mounted campaigns to do benchmarking of transparency practices through OGP, etc. But the final frame is this: we think practice is best. Even if we have a law, as in some countries of Asia, they do. Public demand for FOI, for claiming the right, is very important. We think we can, in the Philippines, do a different story altogether. Build the demand, even if we don't have the law yet. Practice asserting a right and claiming it. And that way, maybe, we might have opportunities for local FOI ordinances, or even maybe sending people to jail for not respecting our right to know. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. So Malou, you talked about this culture of impunity and what a dangerous place the Philippines is and has been for journalists working on political issues, corruption. And a lot of the things that you were saying kind of reminded me of Mexico. And I think there are actually a lot of parallels between the two situations, but a big difference is that Mexico has this law and Philippines does not yet have it. So I wondered if you could each, or maybe starting with Tadeo, if you could talk about the shortcomings. I mean, you talked a little bit about the ugly truth, but when it comes to the people who are actually using these laws to try to expose information and ultimately get to the stage of holding governments accountable for what they do, what are their experiences like now that they do have this law in place that is intended to help them? Yeah.
Yes. Well, it has worked a lot for environmental issues. It has worked a lot for that, and we even had a reform stating that every information regarding environmental issues can never be deemed classified. So that's really important. We have had serious floods, for instance, in a place called Tabasco. Through the transparency mechanisms, people could know that the government was aware that the floods were coming and did nothing to prevent it. So that's really important. Those documents are out there, right? So there are a lot of experiences in that regard, and it has been useful for things not that big, like for instance to prove that your boss who is a public servant, he doesn't come to work, or he comes in late, or he has employed his cousin. Some minor corruption cases have been put on the spot through the transparency mechanisms. So it is not, this thing I'm holding right here, it is not useless. We just need to enforce it thoroughly and without any exceptions. That is what I think we as Mexicans need to do, and what every country needs to do. Everybody needs transparency. So we need to learn how to use it, and the people who use it need to teach other ones. That's really important, and I think that's something we will be doing in advocacy soon, or at least that's what I hope.
Our sense is actually FOI is a very good governance reform initiative. Being, it makes the tasks of the goals of transparency and, more importantly, accountability really a people project, everybody's project. Because right now, if you look at anti-corruption initiatives across the world and governments across the world committing to transparency, accountability, it's too highly politicized. Party politics defined somehow what a government thinks about how far it could be transparent, how close it will be. But we think that publicly good things like transparency and accountability should be the citizens' project first and last. And if we have an FOI law that could actually clearly spell out procedures, uniform guidelines, reasonable costs, as well as deadlines, as well as limited exceptions that would be construed in favor of access to the citizens, we would have everybody actually practicing and asserting their right to know about government. Now, FOI, however, could actually pose some more risks for the respect for civil liberties and human rights, because getting the documents is the first task, but deciphering what the documents mean and making a position, and you know, this guy is a crook, this guy should go to jail, could actually put people's safety at risk, as it had in the case of the journalists. But nonetheless, we are thinking in the PCIJ, we have two important advocacies apart from FOI, meaning, and these are very natural to a media community like PCIJ. We've done a lot of corruption stories, and of course, we keep hopeful still that maybe in time, we will be a more honest government. So integrity is the big ask, not just transparency, not just accountability, but we think two other advocacies might be important that the community should embrace. One is good record keeping by our government agencies. If you have government agencies keeping records of everything, it's easy to assess whether it's been okay or not okay, it's honest, not honest. And I think we really have to shore up numeracy among our people. Most of the documents that really define honesty or lack of in government are documents writ large in numbers. But we all like sound bites, you know, talking heads. And I say that as a journalist, and I admit that for my community, but I say that also in terms of, you know, how civil society groups appreciate numbers. Meaning numbers not because they are, you know, just for big boys with money to play around with, but to understand the dynamics of government, how budgets could be redistributive indeed, how governments are misspending or abusing. So we need to really be better than the technocrats of government in understanding what they mean. And so I think here one big gap is capacity for us to really know that, you know, this government has fiddled with public funds in a bad way. So, so those are the things that I think would be important. FOI is a very important strategic tool for good governance, but it will not mean that everybody will be safe. It could mean maybe that some people could be put at risk if we report about what the documents mean.
Actually, can I, or do you want to?
No.
Well, I wanted to just pick up from, so you talked a lot about the need to engage not just journalists and people, you know, who have a lot of expertise in this area, but the public at large, you know, like a broader citizenry, and you, I mean, you guys all touched on this, but I do, even personally, in my own efforts to navigate these laws in the United States, where I live, and to understand how these systems work in other places, you do find it's complicated. And the systems, I think there have been great efforts to make them user-friendly, but that's not always the reality. So I actually wondered if we could start with you, Marietta, because I think you guys have thought a lot about this problem and made some real strides in making it possible for regular citizens to figure out the system and figure out how to use it.
Yeah, if you go to our website, I think the majority of the requests they are mostly about public funds. Although under the law you can request working documents of the authorities, or you can request their regulations, things about their staff, about their activities. So people, I think, haven't recognized what kind of stories can be digged up with the help of the Freedom of Information law. That's why we are trying to teach NGOs to use this for advocacy, meaning that they go to our workshops and we discuss what kind of issues they work on. And for an environmentalist NGO, there might be a lot of documents that are interesting, as you were saying, and actually in Hungary there were corruption cases related to environmental issues as well. So these things are not far from each other, and we have them frame the questions, and we have them, in case their request is denied, to file a lawsuit. So I think it's very important to raise awareness, and that's why we keep publishing stories about freedom of information requests. If there is something happening in the Philippines, I would write about it. If something is happening in the US regarding the FOI laws, I would write about it, and I would present stories from other countries and stories from our website as well.
We have a project called Money Politics Online. The PCIJ has tried to accumulate government data and documents over the last 25 years. And the key things that are most sticky or most interesting to people who visit the website are local projects data, meaning roads, bridges that will be built, schools in their communities. There's also a great appetite for the asset records or the wealth of public officials. So, I mean, there is also a lot of interest now, especially when elections come up. Every 3 years in the country they do. Campaign spending by the candidates and donors. So, I think people know that they want data and documents for FOI to be very, very relevant, or for FOI to hit home. The data that they need are data that they want to be more informed, better informed citizens. Data that would show whether their government officials are lying or not lying, or honest or not honest. But unfortunately, these are the data that government legislators tend to be very, very careful about. However, I think also there is a great interest in data that benefits personal or family welfare, like land records. You've seen that, the filings, or even, for example, access to government services like the Bolsa, conditional cash transfer program, but they're not being made available. So my sense is we all have a lot of work to do, even with an FOI law. The big task would be to encourage people to do the practice, actually file requests, wait for the requests, censure those who will not give them the documents, and then also probably open up more agencies, because in truth, some agencies are more open than others because they give budget documents. And for the most part, they're just plans. They're just, the lay of land, how government wants to spend money, but it doesn't show you whether the spending side data could be captured. So I think people in the pork barrel million march campaign of our bloggers, they wanted spending data, not budget data. They wanted data on corruption and kickbacks, not plans. And I think we're looking at, I think all of us should probably also be clear. There's a process to it, there's a practice side to it, and government should be clear that these are the data that people deserve to be there. Not traffic data, not data about all the things we know anyway.
I can argue with that, but I won't. I would try to go back to that you were saying that we also have to open up the data. We had a case when we were even filing a lawsuit for the documents and invoices with a company that was allegedly close to a mayor in Budapest. And first they denied fulfilling the request, then they said we have to pay $10,000 for scanning the documents. Now the Hungarian law is similar to the Mexican law. There are limits to how much you can be requested to pay for the documents. So we also filed a lawsuit against this, appealed against this. And in the end we only had to pay $1,000 for scanning more than 3,000 documents. It's 3,000 documents, so it was a lot of invoices, but, and this is where the opening up and liberating the data comes in. These were printed and scanned documents. Now you cannot process and analyze that just like this. It's like getting a pile of paper and then you have to do something with that. So we had 40 volunteers working on the documents and putting them into spreadsheets for our journalists to be able to analyze it. So opening up the data and even suggesting file formats to public bodies is a very important issue.
Wow, so you're opening the data by hand. Once you have all this data and you put it out there and make it possible for people to understand a little bit about what it means, when do you get to accountability? We always hear transparency and accountability. They're like a married couple, but it's actually oftentimes, I think, it's hard for us actually in Global Voices advocacy. We always know what the problem is, but it can be hard to figure out what to do next. Tadeo, could you comment on that for us?
Yeah, thank you. Once you get the information you need, you can have proof that something went wrong and nobody in the government did anything about it. So sometimes your more powerful tool when you have that is your vote. You can not vote for the same party, but in Mexico they always vote for the same party. So this is something. This is a tool for democracy, right? So if you have the information and you can prove that they were not doing the job properly, you can punish them with your vote, and that's something you have to do. If you want to say you're living in a democracy, of course, Mexicans like to brag about the democracy they supposedly live in, but I think they should exercise their vote. But just to clarify something, well, not to clarify, but just to answer the question about accountability. Normally, the accountability agencies are different from the ones that are in charge of transparency. So transparency is used to bring out the information, but the transparency experts or the transparency offices, like E5 in Mexico, is not supposed to do something. It's not, to punish the public servants who were not coming to work or who were employing their neighbors or something like that. No, you're supposed to have a different office for that, and that's the way it should work. And I guess there are some countries where it works like that. but I'm not sure.
I think there is a big appeal here for netizens, citizen media, geeks, to actually look at lay of land, the state of documents or data in our countries. In developing world, the developing world like the Philippines is, they're talking about hard copies or separate HTML, PDF files that are not okay for sorting and analysis. So the big task really is, even if the data are there, we have to sort and analyze and actually physically scan and encode according to spreadsheets that could be available for analysis, that could be mashed up with other data. So I think as we grow in our understanding of, in our practice of getting documents physically through FOI, we should also all grow together as a community so that we could organize data sets, databases, and tell the story of our citizens and our government across time, time series. What we don't have right now is that kind of access to data, meaning time series should know this political party has done right according to public works contracts or something like that. And I think the big task there is not just government itself, but the citizens. So we're happy to see, for example, hackathons being organized by our government, but these are separate data sets, not a really good data.gov format that cuts across branches of government, not just executive agencies, but also legislature and judiciary. So we really are interested in looking at data projects that would actually be above partisan politics, or that could outlive the terms of presidents or political parties. So I think, because in our mind, really sincerely, we think this is a non-partisan public good that should actually belong to the community of practitioners, the geeks, the citizen media, the journalists, the CSOs, not to political parties.
So I'm going to do one more question and then we'll open it to the audience. I hate to end on the dark side of things, but that's what I'm going to do. So I've had the pleasure of working with both of you as authors and in talking with you about shifting political circumstances and overwhelming corruption in both of your countries. And I wondered if you could each talk about how the exercise of these laws and their limits may shift in relationship to political circumstance, and then what are some of the consequences that people have faced for people or organizations have faced for really trying to use these laws to bring about change?
In Hungary, there has been a process that was called by the Transparency International state capture. This means that the government, as you were saying, the government, not specifically the state, is taking measures to enforce a legal environment that helps them do bad things. Let's just say that, do bad things without being able to hold them accountable for what they are doing. And the problem in Hungary is that there is increasingly an environment where people who work to build a democratic society are under attack. Our NGO is on a sort of blacklist and is under investigation from a public body, the Governmental Auditing Office, for running the project that I was telling you about, the workshops where we are talking to people and telling them how to use the freedom of information request to exercise their democratic rights and learn more about how the state works. So at the moment, this investigation is going on, and it's against actually 58 NGOs that use funds from the EEA Norway grants. And there are 13 who are specifically working in democratic values areas that are under investigation. And there was a police raid in the donor organization's office, and they took away the files of the 13 blacklisted organizations. So we are working in a challenging environment, let's say.
Well, about the consequences that people have faced in Mexico for using transparency, I'd like to say that there have been consequences for individuals, but never to organizations. So organizations, NGOs, are probably a good way to make transparency happen in Mexico. Some individuals have been fired for asking for public information. I have seen a couple of cases of people who was trying to prove that their boss went to Vegas with public money, so they fired him. That happens. And recently in Advox, we informed about a law professor specialized in transparency who was shot within the university campus. So it is not clear why he was shot, but you could safely say that it had something to do with the work he has been doing. So there is a long way to go, because this needs to keep coming. I mean, the transparency, not the shootings. But we really need to achieve the three things that we who work in transparency are always worried about. We're worried about privacy for the individual, transparency for the institutions, and accountability for anyone exercising any kind of authority.
Questions from all of you? Let's see. I'll just run over to you, Angel.
Hi, my name is Angel Carrion. I am from Puerto Rico, and I just wanted to comment on something that caught my attention. Malou, you mentioned near the beginning of your presentation that tech is not a bypass mode for transparency and accountability. And after today's conversation, I think, or at least I wouldn't be surprised to see a trend emerging among governments to kind of just throw technology at a problem and then say, look, we're being transparent. An example that immediately came to my mind was a law that was approved rather quietly back home a little over a year ago, saying that government agencies and public corporations had to live stream the board meetings and keep them online for a certain amount of time for citizens to be able to see them. Now, what happens in practice is that the meeting that is taped, that is recorded, is really something that's just a show for the camera. They actually do real meetings before or after. Now, I happen to know that for a fact. Now, the thing is that most people don't know that this law even exists. Now, my question to the panelists is, have you or are you aware of any similar legislation passed in other countries, and how does it work? Does it work well? Does it work at all? I'd like to get some reaction on that.
Well, I was referring to initiatives by the government. In general, step one, they're very good for transparency. They upload, quarterly disbursement reports, all numbers. Or they could get seal of good housekeeping for local government units, but self-reporting. Okay, so we were asking some of our local officials, the Department of Interior people, but in this town, in Maguindanao, where the massacre occurred, in Sharif Agua, journalists cannot even get inside, and they have a transparency seal. We could get killed if we entered the town, but they have a transparency seal. So many other local government units have transparency seals. In Abra, a province that's also has some violent record of election violence. So the one group there, CSO, tried to get documents on paracetamol to compare how to verify if they are really a transparent government now. They wouldn't even be given contracts for paracetamol. And when some of them were just asked to just look at the records and just write down notes. So sometimes the good reforms are actually happening online as IT development projects. But I think the norms, the systems, the procedures within government. Now, there are two things important here. I think the buy-in of civil service is not there yet. So sometimes IT projects for transparency are imposed with very good external consultants doing the job for civil service. But civil service in the country, our rank and file employees do not even have internet access significantly. I don't think they've even been involved in what's the content audit, meaning the infra for data that we think we should be delivering out there. So that's one thing. And then the second point is access by citizens. These are actually projects that are very good, but as Tonio and our Philippine colleagues have told you, only 30% of Philippines has access. And finally, these are incentivized projects, meaning if you do your transparency seal as a mayor or governor, you get money, a performance challenge fund. So we don't think it's really connected, the transparency initiative. So we were thinking only, they want to do it because it's the cool thing to do, to be online as a government, to put your documents up there. But when you validate it, who in his right mind would have the commitment to look at numbers and numbers that don't make sense? So, I think it's important for government to somehow give us documents, numbers with meaning numbers that tell a story, numbers that could be sorted and analyzed.
Hello, I'm Pronoy from Taiwan. I would just want to offer an example from Taiwan. We have an organization in Taiwan called G0B. Actually, this is a COP. And what they do is also, they use a neutral tone to persuade the government that releasing data to be open government to get on the open data chain is cool. So as you can see, governments everywhere want to be on that trend. They want to look cool. So, I mean, using a more neutral tone to persuade the government to tell them this will boost our economy, that will boost our national standard or boost our some guys and anything is one way. Another example is that we all get all those files in like PDF or HTML that you cannot use directly. So there's an example, a bunch of G0V developers they printed and scanned all the data of all the document of the political donation to politicians. We have the document, but the government asks us to scan it, and they will not. They don't have the digital file, and they don't want to release it online. You can access it, but you have to pay and to scan it. And then our developer develop a program that they use optical recognition tools, which means that like the reCAPTCHA, you know, when we are entering passwords, we try to log in to certain websites, there's a reCAPTCHA, right? Then the program will automatically recognize the numbers and the words in the document after scanning. And it uses we citizens to verify those numbers and words. It will ask, is this certified? And if it is certified, you click yes, or you can enter no, and then you enter the correct number. We, with the citizen help, we sort of clarify like 300,000 pages of document in one night. So it's relatively very fast speed. And if you're interested, I can introduce you the programs that the GOV organization used. Thank you.
I can only take one more question. I saw that you had your hand up.
There's one. No pressure because it's the last question, right? My name's Brad Patterson. I actually live here in Cebu. I know I don't look Filipino, but I'm growing from within. Been here for about 5.5 years, and one of the questions I wanted to ask about Malou relates to the Freedom of Information Act that is going through the legislature right now. And when I look at Freedom of Information Acts, there's kind of three things that I see as things that are important. One of them is the enforcement of it, that it actually happens, that people have to turn over information. The second thing is the efficiency with which they do it, because there's a lot of, I'm getting to it, and years later, I'm still getting to it. And the third thing is exceptions. And so it's kind of the 3 E's of the system. One of the things I've noticed in reading about the progress of the Freedom of Information Act is, like a lot of Philippine laws, it's an excellent law, but the exceptions list is longer than the core law. And it appears that a lot of people have the ability to decide on their own, I have an exception. So it looks good, but I'm just curious from your perspective, as this is going through the legislature, what's your opinion on that? And is there something that the Philippine citizens might be able to do to influence it more? Because I think a lot of people don't realize what's really happening as it's going through the legislature. And if I've got it wrong, tell me that too.
Well, actually, Attorney Nepo Malaluan is the lead convener of the Right to Know Coalition, and for 15 years we've been at it. So the law right now has been passed in the Senate, the bill, but in the House, a committee is ready to report out to the for debate in the floor. And there have been mixed opinions about whether it's a good law or should be pursued. Our personal thinking, we will not support any of this bill if this bill doesn't represent the composite wisdom of the CSOs that had worked at it. It is not like a perfectly worded in terms of exceptions, but we believe the exceptions are so clearly defined in terms of procedures for invoking exceptions, as well as for procedures that would be construed in favor of access and not to hide the crime. So the best FOI laws we've studied across the nation, about 102 countries now, actually have exceptions that are there because maybe that is a more democratic path to take in favor of people's rights, rather than have our courts decide. Every filing will be decided by the court, so it's total every step of the way. Now, I think that the key thing really here is the challenge of preparing the bureaucracy to do it. There should be a definition of classification of documents a year after the law is passed. So it's a long migration path really to making it really work for us citizens. Right now we have a Marcos decree that classifies so many things as secret, top secret, including newspaper clippings or confidential. So, I mean, it's one of those things that have to go, even inconsistent laws in the Corporation Code, etc., what should be kept secret, Bank Secrecy Act, but this is a law, this is a bill that so far I think represents the best inputs, but the work is not done yet. It could be constrained further, it could be liberalized further, we don't know. But we're saying that the practice is what would be the override, meaning even if we don't have a law, we should assert it now. And finally, I think the key thing to remember is this is not individual journalists or citizens at all. I mean, this is really the rights of citizens to get documents that they need. So if you ask me, for the most part, the provisions are very good in favor of the greatest number of citizens, not including, of course, exceptions that people are concerned about, like national security or something else. So I hope we get it, but even if we don't get it, I think the coalition wants to practice and assert the right to know.
Yeah, I just want to say that there is always work to be done when it comes to transparency, and I can say that the 4 of us are always happy to do it.
To add something to this exemption thing that I also wanted to mention before, in Hungary, the government, it turned out, has used FinFisher, as you know, a surveillance software, because we were on the list published by Phineas Fisher. Our government was using their customer service because they couldn't install it on someone's computer. Yeah, no worries. But we have requested information on this before the Hague emails have been published, and the government said they cannot publish anything about using surveillance software because this is a national security issue. So, there are times when national security and the citizens' rights are clashing, and we should be very aware when we are introducing exemptions, how we introduce them, and don't let state capture happen in the Philippines.
Okay, Well, Marietta, Tadeo, and Malou, thank you so much for all of your insight and sharing with us, and let's have some lunch.